In the previous video, we got our first look into this Toro mower, and I have to admit it, but it looked like it was going to be hard to sell because of how rough it looked. Now, once we got it cleaned up a bit, our job getting it ready for sale wasn't over by a long shot, and the worst part was that this one was going to push my limits when it comes to investing money into any one project, and had me wondering if making a profit was even a possibility. In today's video, we look at this Toro mower, and the problem is that in the last part of this video, we found out that it had a fuel leak coming from somewhere around the carb, and it's not advisable that we try and sell it that way, so we definitely need to try and fix it. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. After giving it a really good quick cleaning, I then put fuel into the tank to test whether the carb was leaking, and sure enough, although the leak was very slow, it's still a leak. After taking off the air filter to look at the front of the carb, I didn't see any fuel leaking from it. That means it must be coming from the bottom of the carb where the bowl is at. Taking a closer look at the carb, I can see that the carb's bowl gasket looks a bit irregular, and that would be a good place for a leak to come from. That means we need to get to the carb and inspect the bowl gasket for any damage. But before I look at it, I want to do something about this handle knob. It's not wanting to tighten enough to keep the handle tight against the bracket. Now, I don't see any damage to the threads, so I'm just going to put some lube on the nut and the bolt. If that doesn't work, I'll have to use a tap and die set to try and fix it, but I don't think that'll be necessary. Now, I've already drained out the fuel from the tank, but I wasn't able to get all of it out from the bottom because of how the tank is designed. To get the rest of it out, I'll have to remove the fuel line. Now, it looks like there's still some fuel leaking from the line. However, taking a closer look, it appears the bowl gasket is not sealing very well on this side as compared to the front side of the bowl. I can't take the bowl off just yet because there's still fuel in it, so I'll have to drain it there as well. I guess I could have just drained all the fuel from the bowl to begin with, but doing it this way will let me know if I have to replace the fuel line because it's breaking down. Luckily, this one is still in great shape, so I don't have to replace it. Now, when I tried to remove the bowl nut, I soon realized that it wasn't even tight. That means someone must have worked on this carb at some point but didn't check over their work, but who really knows what happened. Now, once it stops dripping, I'll then remove the bowl nut followed by the bowl. Depending upon what we see inside the bowl and how the float works, will let me know if I need to remove the entire carb. Well, it looks like the bowl gasket was definitely the issue because it's severely damaged and there's even a few breaks in it. Of course, we'll have to replace it, but if we need to replace more parts than just the gasket, it might make more sense to just replace the entire carb instead. The other part I need to inspect is how the float sits when at the top part of its travel. If it's almost parallel with the mounting surface for the bowl, it means the needle seat is not swollen, which is what we want. However, if the seat is swollen, it will cause the float to not be parallel at the top of its travel, which means we need to replace the seat, otherwise the carb will leak fuel. Now, for some reason, I have the hardest time finding the right bowl gaskets, and that's because I want to buy aftermarket ones, but they all seem to be very low quality in comparison to the OEM part. What I'm trying to say is that I don't have any bowl gaskets on hand, but I do have an idea on how I can fix this one. After removing the gasket and cleaning what I can from the bowl, I'm going to clear the openings in the bowl nut because it's also the fuel jet for the carb. I like to use this small wire, but I would also consider using carb cleaner as well. However, I don't always have carb cleaner with me, and this wire always stays in my tool bag. Now, after a few minutes, I think it's clear enough, so I'm going to deal with the gasket. Now, some of you are not going to agree with what I'm about to do. This is another carb from some other project, and I'm not sure why it's not being used, but since it's not being used, I'm going to take the bowl gasket from it to use on this one. Now, this was a desperation move. I wouldn't do this on a normal day. I'm just going to do this to get this mower up and running to make sure everything works on it, and then I'll replace the bowl gasket or just get a new carb. Now, the gasket is in one piece and it's not brittle either, but there's a lot of buildup on this gasket and I need to clean it before I install it. If I were to install it just like this, it wouldn't seal very well and cause a fuel or an air leak, which could affect how the carb works. Once the gasket is clean, I'll then reinstall it and the bowl. Hopefully everything lines up better than the last time. Once I get the bowl nut on, I'm not going to tighten it just yet. Instead, I'm going to gently spin the bowl to check how it's sitting on the carb. Only then will I carefully tighten the bowl nut. Make sure not to over tighten the bolt, otherwise you could damage it. At this point, we just need to put the fuel line back onto the carb and then put some fuel into the tank to test whether the used gasket is going to hold up or not. Now, there's no point in putting everything back on and then doing the test because we already have everything connected that matters for this test. After waiting for about 5 minutes, I don't see any fuel leaking from the front of the carb or the bottom, which means the gasket is holding just fine. We just need to put the rest of the intake system back on and then move to the next pressing issue, which has to do with the wheels. When installing the air filter base, don't forget to connect the breather tube for the emission system, otherwise the engine could breathe in unfiltered air and cause premature engine wear. I also took this opportunity to clean the dirt off these parts, and it was mainly because I want to keep my hands clean while filming, so it's really up to you if you want to do the same thing. If you've seen my videos before, you'll note that I like to lube the wheels to make it easier to spin. Now this will make it easier to push the mower around while you're using it or even while you're not mowing. Now the front wheel is spinning just fine and I could have just left it alone, but that wouldn't be any fun. Besides, I think we could get it to spin better if we did lube it. You don't need to remove the wheels to do this, but it gives you an opportunity to check the wheel bolts for corrosion. Surprisingly, the bolt is in really good condition, but I think some lithium grease will make it work smoother. You don't have to use lithium, any sort of lube will do just fine. Once I get the wheel back on, I want it to spin longer than the last time, which is going to be hard to beat considering how well it did last time. Now it turns out both of the front wheels were just fine. However, the problem I was having was that sometimes the wheels would lock up, and I guess it was the rear wheels that was doing it. That's going to be an issue because this mower is self-propelled, which could mean we have a serious issue with either the wheels or worse yet, the transmission. Now I haven't been keeping track, but I think this wheel just won the award for the longest free spin I've ever filmed. I'm also going to lube the height adjusters to make sure they work smoothly. Now, if you never change the height of your mowers, well, this may not be a concern for you. So this is the rear wheel, which is supposed to be self-propelled. However, if I give it a spin, you'll see that it spins just like the front wheel, which it's not supposed to do. The reason is because it should be connected to the transmission by a drive gear, so it should not be able to freewheel just like this. After getting the wheel cover out of the way, we can see the drive gear on the wheel, and the first thing I see is that I don't see any points on the teeth. Instead, they look like they've been all broken off. At first, I wondered if the metal drive gear was having an issue spinning, but it seems to be turning the transmission just fine. So I decided to put the wheel back on without the cover to see how the gears interacted with each other, only to realize they weren't. In fact, at certain times, they were actually interfering with each other, which is why sometimes the wheels would work fine and then lock up. The only way to fix this is to either replace the plastic gear with a new one or try to make a set using a 3D printer. Now, I don't have a 3D printer, but I do have a set of rear drive wheels from another Toro. However, the gear is metal and not plastic, so I'm not sure how this is going to work. Unfortunately, the wheel won't turn, which means the gears are not meant to be paired with each other. That's a real shame because I was hoping to have a use for these wheels. That means if I want to get the self-propel working on this mower, I need to replace the wheels with new ones, and I hate to say it, but I don't think they're going to be cheap. So for right now, I'm just going to put them back on until I can decide what to do. While the mower is on the table, I'm also going to take off the blade so I can sharpen it. That's when I noticed a terrible mistake. This blade was turned on the adapter 90 degrees from where it's supposed to be. I've never seen this before and I never really thought it could happen, but I guess they proved me wrong. It also turns out the bolt for the blade wasn't tight either. I really don't want to guess as to why the blade was turned and why the bolt was loose. I'm just going to fix it and keep on moving. There's also something interesting with the engine as well, which I haven't had to deal with before. There's actually too much oil in it, but I'm not going to change the oil until I get it warm. For the meantime, I'm just going to pour out several ounces and then start the mower for a test start. Of course, after pouring out some of the oil, I still need to check the oil level before trying to start it. I'm also going to remove one of the drive wheels to see if the transmission is working just fine. This is probably not needed, but I want to make sure there's not a bigger issue that I'll have to deal with later on. So it turns out the transmission is working just fine, and one of the wheels seems to be better than the other one. However, the self-propel isn't going to work very well with only one wheel driving it. Unfortunately, after doing some research, a pair of drive wheels is going to cost just shy of $32, which to me is just insane, and is definitely going to cut into the profit margin for this mower. Another reason why the drive may not be working well is an internal problem with the transmission. Unfortunately, if that was the case, a new transmission will cost just as much as a working used mower, which means I wouldn't make any money on this mower. So in the end, we got this mower looking 100 times better, serviced the carb, and fixed a fuel leak. Now it's not ready to be sold just yet, and the reason is because we need to sort out the drive system. Otherwise, I'll have to sell this mower as a push mower because the drive system isn't working correctly. Then that means it could cut my profit in half, and I just can't do that. But I'd have to use the profit to pay for the wheels if I decided to fix it. I'm just not sure if it's worth doing right now. So my question is, what would you do? Would you sell this mower as a push mower and ask half as much for it as if it was a working self-propel mower, or put the money into it and ask for full price? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.